We have Nikki Watson, and I have to read this because I don't have memory. Nikki's from Celiac WA and is going to give us some information about celiac disease and the support that the Celiac
Western Australia.
Celiac Western Australia offer. So I'll hand it over to Nikki.
Thank you very much. Firstly, thanks so much for giving us the opportunity to come out and talk to you today. As a not-for-profit organisation, Celiac WA, our main aim is to provide support and advocacy for people diagnosed with celiac disease and those requiring a gluten-free diet. But it's also about awareness and educating people in the community as to what it is, whether it be you need to be on a gluten-free diet because you've got celiac disease, or whether it's a gluten intolerance or a medical reason as to why you are best on a gluten-free diet. Obviously, most of you or all of you would have heard what celiac disease is or what gluten-free food is. Firstly, I must mention that I do not have any medical training whatsoever. A little bit of my background: I'm a mum of two beautiful girls who are now 12 and 15, which, yeah, she's still beautiful. And they were diagnosed with celiac disease at 5 and 7. So it was a little bit daunting. My sister has celiac disease and my niece has celiac disease. So it is an autoimmune disease, it is genetic. So once one member of the family is diagnosed with celiac disease, there is a 10% chance that the immediate family, i.e. parents, brothers and sisters and children, could also have not necessarily celiac disease, but the gene, which is the potential then to develop celiac disease later on in life. So, as I mentioned, celiac disease, it is an immune disease causing a reaction to gluten. It can develop at any time. As I said, my children were 5 and 7 when they were diagnosed. Family members were a teenager and in her late 20s, early 30s. We have people who are recently diagnosed in their 60s, 70s and 80s. And children, 2 and 3, babies starting solids and something's not quite right, and they carry all the classic symptoms. Children are a little bit harder to diagnose for doctors just because they don't tend to show up things in blood tests and those sorts of things, but it can happen at any time. As I mentioned, it is a genetic condition, so there is a strong family link there, and it's a permanent lifelong condition. At the moment there is no cure, and also you can't be a little bit celiac. This is where we come into play with people that have the gluten intolerance, so they can tolerate a little bit of gluten. Like you can't be a little bit pregnant, you can't be a little bit celiac. You either are or you aren't. There's no sort of in between. So obviously, what is gluten? Gluten is a protein found in wheat. The protein is called gliadin. In rye it's called secalin. In barley, it's called hordein, and in oats, it's called avenin. Now, the oats is a little bit tricky because when they test for gluten, it's called the ELISA test, and they can't test the amount of avenin in the oats at the moment. So, but they have found, Coeliac Australia and researchers have found that 2 out of every 5 people diagnosed with celiac disease react with the same damage to the stomach and to the small intestine with oats as they do with the other 3 grains. So that's why in Australia we have oats as classed as not acceptable for people, because the issue is you can actually ingest the oats, not show any symptoms, but still get that damage caused. So USA and Europe, they don't actually class oats. They say you can get gluten-free oats which are contaminant-free. They're farmed in their own farming area, they're milled in their own factory, so there's no chance of any cross-contamination with other grains. So if you ever see gluten-free oats anywhere, they're contaminant-free. They're not actually gluten-free because the amount of gluten cannot never be tested. Okay, so what happens with someone when they're diagnosed with celiac disease? Everybody's born with this healthy villi in the gut. They're little tiny finger-like projections that float around like this, and they're called villi. They allow the body to absorb nutrients from the food. So once you've absorbed your food, all the vitamins and nutrients and all the good stuff that you need gets absorbed through these little finger-like projections into the stomach and into the small intestine, and they go about their merry way where they need to go. And that's obviously all your iron and calcium, all the nutrients, and obviously they help with the digestion of food because it's all being absorbed correctly. With celiac disease, what happens is the villi become inflamed and flattened. So instead of being up finger-like like that, what happens is these little gaps swell and it ends up closing up like that. So you're trying to absorb the food and it's not getting the nutrients from the food, and it's not getting anywhere. So the body can't absorb the nutrients. Celiac disease is a chronic malabsorption issue, so quite often presents in things like anemia because you're not absorbing iron, calcium deficiencies, vitamin D deficiencies, all those sorts of things because your body cannot absorb that food that it needs to. We do tend to find quite commonly, not always, but the elderly people that are diagnosed, generally they've got osteoporosis and broken hip or whatever else, and that's when the diagnosis has come, and they'll say, oh, I've been swallowing calcium tablets, or the people that are very anemic, I'm swallowing iron and eating red meat and eating spinach. If you've got this unhealthy villi, until that repairs, you can swallow as many tablets or eat as much red meat as you like, but your body can't physically absorb it, so you're not going to actually improve with that damaged villi. What's that? You can't cure celiac disease. There is a way of managing it, which is obviously the gluten-free diet, but you can't cure it as such. Statistically, there's at least 1 in 70 Australians with celiac disease. Interestingly, that's 1 in 60 women and 1 in 80 men. So it is a little bit more prevalent in men than women, but alarmingly only 25% of those people are diagnosed. It is nearly twice as prevalent as type 1 juvenile diabetes and 25 times more common than cystic fibrosis. 30% of the population carries the celiac gene. I'm a carrier of the gene, obviously, children, sister, but I do not have celiac disease. I continue to eat gluten in my diet so that if I do ever develop symptoms, I can be correctly diagnosed and then lead a path to happy, healthy life. Lots of people say, oh, you must be on a gluten-free diet because your children are. No, absolutely not. So practice what I preach. Of that 30% of the population, it's actually only a small number that do go on to develop celiac disease. So that's why we say to people, just because you've got the gene doesn't mean you need to be on a gluten-free diet. As I said, currently there is no cure. The only effective treatment is a strict gluten-free diet. There is lots of research going on at the moment. I don't know if any of you have ever heard in Queensland they're doing a hookworm trial where they're actually injecting, or they've finished it now, they injected hookworms, which sounds quite scary, but from all accounts it's been very, very successful. And the other treatment they're looking at is a vaccine. So no ideas on how far away that is. I'd like to think it would happen in my children's lifetime, and whether it's a once-off needle to turn off that trigger or whether it's a booster shot, we're not sure. So, but at the moment the scientists around the world are working on what triggers it, because to develop celiac disease, A, you have to have the gene disposition for it, B, you need to be eating the gluten to get the reaction, and then there's this third environmental factor, and that's what the doctors don't know. And as to why children are diagnosed with it as opposed to teenagers, as opposed to adults, like it doesn't matter what stage of life you're in, it can happen at any time, and they don't know what triggers that to happen. Now the symptoms, there's 12 symptoms on here, but there are over 200 possible symptoms of celiac disease, which is why it's very tricky for doctors to diagnose, because running through those symptoms there, the fatigue and the anemia, well, that goes obviously hand in hand with the malabsorption. You're not absorbing the iron. Flatulence and bloating, the diarrhoea, the constipation, they're the very classical symptoms, because that's what most people do suffer from. They eat gluten and then they get those shocking tummy cramps, and yeah, they get that diarrhoea constantly, or the other end, and nausea and vomiting as well. Recently, or in the last 10, 20 years, they've discovered that miscarriage and infertility can be linked to it as well. The failure to thrive in children is very common. Don't know if you remember in I think it was the 1980s, they had the little Kampuchean children and Ethiopian children, had the very skinny legs and that big bloated tummy and the very extended ribs. That's sort of a classic once those children have got that pot belly. Yeah, yeah. So that is very common in children, and the doctors, when the children are going to their child health nurses and things like that, you get that yellow book and they chart their height and weight. And really, if they are struggling to grow and meet those milestones, that tends to be a little bit of a trigger to say, hang on, something's not quite right here. The recurrent mouth ulcers, that was my youngest daughter. She had mouth ulcers that just would not heal up. They would bleed at night. It was horrible. So, but within diagnosing her and commencing a gluten-free diet within 2 days, every mouth ulcer was gone, and she's never had one since. So we're an advocate for that reason. Heartburn and reflux is another common symptom. Obviously your body's digestion system isn't working properly, so that's going to cause an issue. And as I mentioned before, those nutrient deficiencies, the iron, the vitamin D, calcium, and all those. Now, to be screened for celiac disease, it is really, really important for someone who thinks they might have celiac disease to keep eating gluten prior to the test. The issue is what they're looking for with the initial screening is a blood test, and they look for antibodies in the blood because the body reacts and it produces these antibodies. If someone's on a gluten-free diet, those antibodies aren't going to be there. They're not going to show up. So it's really important that people keep eating gluten prior to being tested. The amount of gluten they need to be eating is the equivalent of 4 to 6 slices of bread a day. Now, I'm not saying you eat 4 to 6 slices of bread, but it's someone with a normal diet who's having cereal for lunch and a sandwich for cereal for breakfast and a sandwich for lunch, and then having biscuits and things throughout the day, then you're going to be pretty much around, or pasta at night, you're going to be pretty much around there. The problem is for people who commence a gluten-free diet and then go, no, I want to be tested, if they've started to feel better, especially if they've had that classic constipation, diarrhoea, vomiting or whatever else, to then reintroduce gluten and go back to those symptoms, 9 times out of 10 people aren't going to do that. And I can see a lot of heads going yes and no and yes and no. So that's why we do encourage people. I mean, obviously we can't tell you what to do and what not to do. I mean, we're just here to educate. So we do ask people to try, if they haven't commenced a gluten-free diet and they do think it could be celiac disease, to do that, to be tested, to keep eating the gluten. As I said, trip to the GP for the initial blood screening. Then, if that comes back positive with the antibodies, then they are referred to a gastroenterologist for a small bowel biopsy. What they do with that is that they do the endoscopy where they put the tube down into the small intestine. And when we talked about that villi, they take 3 or 4 samples of the villi from the small intestine going right through. They used to do the first third, but now they go through to the second third. And they look at those under the microscope. Now, if those villi look healthy and happy and thin, then it's not celiac disease. But if they're clumpy and lumpy and not good, then that's the diagnosis of celiac disease, that plus those blood tests. You can get false negative blood tests, you can get false positive blood tests. We're all human. It's still a part of the blood screening testing process that's done by humans, so there is always that room for error. So, and there's a small amount of the population whose body doesn't actually produce those antibodies. So if someone is feeling like it could be celiac disease and they're getting the blood work done and it's coming back as negative, then the recommendation could be possibly to do the gene test, because you can test for the gene. So if they've got the symptoms but the antibodies test is negative and the gene test comes back as positive, then it might be further investigation with the gastroenterologist just to do that endoscopy to check for the villi. Yes, Steve?
Quick one on false positives.
Yep.
If you have another autoimmune disease, chances are you get a false positive.
Okay. I did not know that. I know there's a link between autoimmune diseases.
I have
Yep.
autoimmune disease.
Yep.
And I get false positives.
Yep.
I have a lot of IBS problems, but it's
Yep.
not celiac.
Yep.
And I always have a false positive.
Oh, okay.
And it's common.
And it is common? Excellent. Yeah, no, I know there's a direct link between one autoimmune disease makes you more susceptible to others. So, but yeah, I wasn't aware of that one. So, excellent. Thank you for that. I'll remember that one. And the other condition that you need to have is naturopaths and other health providers cannot diagnose celiac disease, because really the correct diagnosis is through the endoscopy. The health complications from not following a gluten-free diet once you've been diagnosed with celiac disease is obviously the malnutrition issue, because that's going to keep happening. You're going to not be able to absorb the food properly. You're not going to let that villi heal, because once the villi is healed and you started a gluten-free diet and the villi heals, you can go back and your body will absorb the food again properly. And okay, you can't undo the damage of bone degeneration and things like that, but it's not going to get any worse. So that's why it's a manageable diet, but there is no actual cure. So it is the gluten-free diet is the way to control the issue. Obviously, as I said, if you didn't adhere to it, then you've got an increased risk of osteoporosis, infertility, liver disease, and there is an increased risk of stomach cancers and bowel cancers with undiagnosed celiac disease as well. And obviously, like general ill health. And we find that especially in people who are asymptomatic when they're diagnosed with celiac disease, and we do follow-up phone calls, and they say, I thought I felt well, but now I feel well. I had no idea how unwell I felt. So that kind of feeling, and we're finding we get that a lot, especially with things like ability to concentrate, ability to multitask, sleeping better. Those sorts of cognitive things that you can't pinpoint until you're actually feeling better. And you think, oh, how did I function like that? So we're finding a lot of people commenting on those sorts of things. Okay, what is gluten intolerance? Now, people with gluten intolerance can suffer those similar short-term physical symptoms like the bloating and the diarrhoea and even the vomiting and the cramping and those sorts of things. But these people with the gluten intolerance, they've been tested for celiac disease, antibodies have come up 0, they've been endoscoped and the villi is fine. So I don't like to say it's like an allergy, but it is, you have the intolerance too, because celiac disease is not an allergy, it's an immune disorder. But a gluten intolerance, your body doesn't handle the gluten, but it doesn't look at it as a foreign part and attack itself like it does with celiac disease. And that's why sort of some people with gluten intolerance, they can choose if they want to have a little bit because they know that they've got to suffer the consequences of that, but it's not causing future health problems down the track. So, and then it's estimated that at least 10% of Australians eat gluten-free for other medical conditions. Obviously, quite a few of you are following a gluten-free diet because it does help with your control of your fibromyalgia. I know thyroid as well, quite a few people I know do follow a gluten-free diet with thyroid because that does help to control their thyroid, and there is some evidence that it can also assist with children with autism. It can help a little bit with the behavioural issues as well. So there are other reasons to be on a gluten-free diet other than just celiac disease. Obviously if it's going to make your health a lot better and a lot easier, then we're not saying no, don't go ahead and do that.
Excuse me.
Yes, love.
It sounds very spooky to me. I've been diagnosed with gastroesophageal reflux disease.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like it's very...
It could well have been, yep, could possibly celiac disease, yeah. Are you still eating gluten, or have you...
I didn't go off gluten.
You haven't gone off at all? Okay.
So I was thinking, gee, that's what it might be.
Could possibly, yeah, it could quite possibly be. As I said, feel free, there's some brochures here and some information there. I mean, we're getting the awareness out there to the doctors. I was speaking to, I'm sorry, I've forgotten your name, Stu. I'm thinking Steve, and I think you know that's Steve. I was talking to Stu a little bit earlier on, and he was saying with fibro it takes quite a while to be diagnosed. They found on average it takes 7 years to be diagnosed with celiac disease because those symptoms are so far-ranging, and also could be commonly, probably 500 other illnesses could cause those exact same symptoms. So it does take a while for people to be diagnosed with celiac disease. So we encourage you to take your information along with you to the doctor, and you could say, look, I've been and listened to this lady talk, and some of the symptoms is what I have. Can you give me the blood test for celiac disease? So, and get that ball rolling as a way of finding out. So. Okay, why be tested? Lots of people say, oh, well, I'm on a gluten-free diet and I'm feeling better and I don't want to know if I've got celiac disease, and that's the end of the story. Obviously, if it is celiac disease, you need to adhere to the strict gluten-free diet so you know that you can't cheat, and cheating's not an option. So, I mean, obviously you don't want to think that, well, I'm just going to have that little bit and hopefully I'm not going to end up with more chance of bowel cancer than not. So that's one of the really, really strict reasons why, because as we mentioned, someone with a gluten intolerance can tolerate that little bit if they choose to. If it's celiac disease, as we mentioned, you should be screened annually for other autoimmune conditions, because once you've got one, there is an increased risk of more. So thyroid, type 1 diabetes, lupus, list goes on and on and on. So yeah, and that way then obviously if you're diagnosed correctly, then the doctor should have you on a care plan to be checking you for those. The other thing is, being a chronic malabsorption issue with diagnosed celiac disease, you're entitled every 2 years to a free bone density test. So to make sure that your body's absorbing the calcium it needs. So that's another good reason to be tested. The final reason to be tested is if there is ever a vaccine, which I haven't got on here, if there is ever a vaccine, from our understanding, you need to have medically diagnosed celiac disease to be eligible to have the vaccine. So there are all these people that have gone on a gluten-free diet and think, yep, no, if there's ever a vaccine, I'll be right. They'll actually have to be tested at some stage to find out. The issue with the whole, once you've gone off gluten and you don't want to go back onto it, and as I said, it's 4 to 6 slices of bread a day for adults, 2 to 3 for children, for a roughly 4 to 6 week period before being tested. The scientists are working really hard at the Walter and Eliza Hall Institute in Melbourne for a 3-day trial. And lots of members and people that we've spoken to that have said, yep, I went on a gluten-free diet and I'm not prepared to do a challenge for 6 weeks. I would say 80% of them say, yeah, do a 3-day challenge. That's doable, it's livable, I can be in pain for 3 days. So the scientists are really excited about that. So that's sort of the latest research, is to then, for those people who have gone on a gluten-free diet, to know one way or the other, is it or isn't it? So. Now, with regards to the gluten-free diet, many foods are naturally gluten-free. Obviously, your meats, your fish, your eggs, your fruits, your vegetables, and it doesn't matter if the cow was grain-fed, it doesn't matter what the chicken ate, the gluten cannot get through. We have people, my butcher told me I can't eat this grain-fed beef. It's like, no, you can. It cannot transfer through the product into the actual animal tissue. So, yeah. So, yeah. There are obviously lots of products marked gluten-free. I'm sure you would have seen the gluten-free aisle from Coles, Woolies, IGA, wherever, grow from this to this in the last 5 years in particular. It's been astronomical. We think that's come about because of the fact that people are... There's this little bit of a connotation, oh, let's follow a gluten-free diet, it's healthy and we're going to get fit and that sort of thing. A naturally gluten-free diet is healthy. However, processed gluten-free food actually has more fat and sugar than non-gluten-free food. They've got to bind it up with something to make it taste a bit better. So it's a double-edged sword. It's helped to raise awareness of celiac disease. It's helped raise awareness of the gluten-free diet. More manufacturers have jumped on board. Downside of that is that you've got these, well, if you're on a gluten-free diet, you're just fussy and you're on a diet. It's a life, yeah. And it's more expensive, yes. The prices have gotten better, I must admit. The loaves of bread are getting a bit bigger for the $8 a loaf that you have to pay for. So that has improved with as I said, the gluten-free thing seems to be a bit of a fad. And if people want to go on a gluten-free diet, knock themselves out. But unfortunately for people with celiac disease, it's now got this stigma attached to it, and especially in the catering industry, and you're eating out and people make a big song and dance and they order a gluten-free main meal and then out comes the dessert tray. I'll have that lemon meringue pie, that looks great. Really? And it's happened to me, and my girls have literally held on to me, Mum, don't go there, just let it go. I was like, okay. And then there's obviously products that are gluten-free by ingredient, and this is a big thing that we educate our members with, because I did it myself. My girls were newly diagnosed. I went straight to the fruit and veggie, straight to the butcher meat bit, and straight to the health food aisle. I didn't go anywhere else. And it is, because you think, okay, that says gluten-free, that says gluten-free, that says gluten-free, but there is a plethora of ingredients out there that are gluten-free by ingredient. So they've got no may contain statements or anything like that, and every ingredient in the product is gluten-free. It just doesn't have gluten-free written on it. So that's one of the big things that we teach people when they're newly diagnosed. Now, for people safely eating gluten-free food, as in buying food, all manufacturers who distribute food in Australia have to abide by our labelling laws. These changed quite a few years ago, that they have to state all the allergens. So they have to state whether it's gluten, whether it's wheat, whether it's nuts, whether it's egg, whether it's soy. That's why they all have those on there now. They must state the allergens. And for an item to be marked gluten-free, it has to contain nil detectable gluten. That level is 3 parts per million. So we're talking the most minuscule amount, and that has been safely tested to be safe for people with celiac disease to consume. So you're talking, what's that, 1 milligram per 100 kilo or something like when it works out. I'm not good at maths. So if you see an item marked gluten-free, they have to be able to, should Fazans go and knock on their door, they have to have passed the test to confirm and show the laboratory testing that their item is actually gluten-free. Otherwise they get in a lot of trouble. The downside, as I mentioned before, of people with celiac disease is that you do have an issue with cross-contamination. So as little as 50 milligrams of gluten, which is 1/100th of a slice of bread. Now that's a lot more than the parts per million we were talking about. That ingestation over a period of time is enough to cause damage to that villi. They may not show the symptoms, so there might be no symptoms whatsoever, but that amount of gluten is enough to cause the damage to the small intestine. So it's not worth the risk for them, and that's why they need to be so pedantic when we're going out dining and asking all the questions and those sorts of things, because it can cause issues further on down the track, and there's nothing more frustrating than you take every action and then you think, okay, well, you've gone and done that now and undone the hard work. We're not saying you're never going to get an accidental gluten ingestion. That happens to my girls. It's happened a few times to them. And we certainly recommend people to go out and dine out. Like, that's such a social part of life. You don't want to just lock yourself in your cupboard and not go anywhere. So our big objective is to raise awareness and support of the catering industry and trying to get them across the board. There is an accreditation program being undertaken at national level, and that's hopefully going to take off. It was trialled in some McDonald's stores in Newcastle through the McCafe. It wasn't anything to do with McDonald's, as in hamburgers and things like that. And lots of people were quite horrified. Why did they choose McDonald's? It was on the McCafe side, and effectively you could get raisin toast and focaccias and those kind of things. So we're not talking frozen hot chips and all that sort of stuff. The exciting thing about that trial was the fact that if you went into McCafe and you bought the gluten-free raisin toast, or you went into that McCafe and you bought the normal gluten-free normal raisin toast, it was the same price. The gluten-free food was the same price as the non-gluten-free. And that, as a mum of two girls with celiac disease, and those of you that do follow the gluten-free diet, that's exciting to think you're not paying any more, you're not being penalised. So that's sort of, and we're hoping that this will take off. I haven't had any more on it, but yeah, we're a little bit excited that that would be wonderful. And these businesses, it's the same kind of thing as the HACCP training that they have to do for their hazards and stuff like that. It's training along that kind of a module. So to take this on, they have to be, it can't be, oh yeah, we'll try that for a while. It's pretty serious stuff. So to hopefully be able to provide that to people is pretty exciting. So Coeliac Australia are working very hard on getting that happening. Yes?
I just wanted to ask about the contamination. I'm celiac.
Yep.
And when I go into a coffee shop,
Yep.
they'll have something that's flourless or whatever.
Yep.
But I ask them, is that gluten-free? And they say they can't actually say it's gluten-free because it's sitting alongside.
Yeah, or they say it's low gluten.
So
Yeah.
is there, is there a risk of contamination?
There is a real risk of contamination. I like the ones that you see that will have, orange and almond cake seems to be the good old standard that everyone has. And if they're pre-cut, individually wrapped and things like that, to me that they've done their absolute best to make that okay. But yeah, if you've got a gluten-free friand in a little cup case sitting next to an apple crumble that's got crumbs coming everywhere, no, I wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole. And that's where they put the low gluten. There is no such thing as low gluten in Australia. It's gluten-free or it's not gluten-free. And if they've bought it in gluten-free and they have whacked it on in a cupboard with everything else, they can't make that gluten-free claim anymore. Yeah. So that's where we do strongly encourage people to educate nicely, because people do get a bit upset and it's like, we need to encourage people to educate the catering people. Say, you know what, that's great that you've got that, but if you'd gone that one step further and done this and put it separately, individually wrapped, that'd be fine. And just that kind of education will make them go, oh, okay, hang on a minute. So we do encourage people to do that and encourage our members to do that as well. Now, Celiac WA, as I mentioned, we're a not-for-profit organisation. We had our 35th anniversary last year. We've got 1,750 members in WA. Bulk of those are Perth and South West. We do have a few up north, but not a huge amount. As I said, committed to providing support, information and understanding for people diagnosed with celiac disease and those medically requiring gluten-free diet. We are the voice for celiac disease. We advocate for our members' behalf. So we do get members that ring us or email us and say they found a product that it's got gluten-free on the front of it, and all of a sudden there's a weird ingredient on the back. We forward those to Coeliac Australia, and that is followed up. So that is one of the things that we do. We do collaborate with the medical professions, especially over eastern states with the professors and the scientists over there. And then the gluten-free manufacturers, they come on board, they support us with our expos and things like that throughout the year. And we do have a celiac research fund, which we encourage our members to support in the hope of being able to assist and provide funds. I think Celiac Victoria not that long ago gave them the Walter and Eliza Hall Institute a nice little kick to help them with their research and funding, so they can hopefully get that 3-day trial happening quicker. So the services that we provide, obviously we're member based and that's how we keep our services going. The label reading workshops and guided supermarket tours, there are big ticket things, because as I mentioned before, when first diagnosed with celiac disease, it is so easy just to go into that shop and buy the gluten-free product. So we do label reading workshops in the office, teaching people how to read labels so they can tell themselves if it doesn't have gluten-free written on it that it is gluten-free. The guided supermarket tours, we do one a month, every month, one north, one south, we alternate, and they're a fantastic opportunity because you actually literally go up and down every aisle of the supermarket. And I haven't done them for a while, but when I was doing them, I can guarantee you at least one, if not two people out of every tour that we did would say, oh my God, I can still have that. So those favourites that they didn't think they could have anymore are back on the agenda. So it just sort of, and it's great for them to then check the things that they buy and just have that voice that's there to go, yep, no, that is fine, and yep, you're doing it right. So it's effectively label reading live. More or less. We do have local support groups. We have some regional support groups, and we have a coffee group in the Perth North metro area that meet once a month, and they're a great opportunity for people to get together, swap recipes, swap ideas, swap tips and things that they've done, if they've found a new product, if they found a new shop that stocks particular things. They're really, really good idea as well. Especially we've got quite a few mums that meet because the lady that runs it, her daughter was like mine, diagnosed quite young. So being a mum of a child, it can be a little bit daunting. Hang on, what am I doing right? Lunchbox tips, party tips, those sorts of things. So we also have a Celiac Friends, which meets, it hasn't met for a while, and we go to a restaurant and obviously it was a bit tricky. Years ago, you'd have to organise with the restaurant to be able to provide the gluten-free food, and we haven't had as many because more and more businesses are coming on board with that. But we've got another event coming up in July because we haven't done one for a while, so we thought, yep, let's get our Celiac Friends group going again. As I mentioned, we have our annual Gluten-Free Food and Healthy Living Expo. That's held in March every year. March 13th to 20th every year is Celiac Awareness Week, and that's our big ticket thing that we do. We have it runs over a Saturday and a Sunday with about 4,000 people coming through the door. We have lots of people come and do talks. John from Thyroid that we were talking about has been out a couple of times and talked. We've had Dr. Sue Shepherd this year. Don't know if any of you have heard of her. She's and for those of you that are interested, because I did notice, I don't know a lot about fibromyalgia, but there was some of the research that I was looking at before I came out here, it was saying that some people do struggle with irritable bowel with fibromyalgia. And gluten-free diet used to be the way to help with the irritable bowel, whereas now they're finding this FODMAPs diet, which I don't know if any of you are aware of. I don't know much about it, but there is some paperwork from Sue Shepherd's website over there if you're interested in having a look at that, and that's to do with the fermentable sugars in food, and wheat's obviously high in fermentable sugars, so that's why people with irritable bowel do work better on a gluten-free diet. But now Sue's got groundbreaking research that the FODMAPs is what's sort of causing that. So yeah, she came across to our expo last year, and we do have restaurant membership now, which is to educate the restaurants on how to cater gluten-free. Just simple tips like, how about you have a separate coloured plate? So if someone orders a gluten-free meal that you've got, the wait staff and the kitchen staff, everybody knows, well, the thing on the green plate, that's a gluten-free meal. Those kinds of things. Having a separate area in the kitchen, obviously, which is pretty common sense, but having colour-coded tongs and fryers and that sort of stuff. There's so much out there that you can do, and it doesn't take a lot to modify to make it a gluten-free safe area to cook to avoid cross-contamination. Things like if you're cooking stuff in the oven, put the gluten-free food on the top. Gluten can't carry through steam. That's not going to get you anywhere, but obviously crumbs can drop. So if you put the gluten-free food on the top and the non-gluten-free food underneath, and I practice that at home with my children when we have food in the oven, gluten-free stuff goes on the top, everything else goes underneath. We have 2 toasters because when you think about it, a toaster, and butters, that's a big one. We always recommend people have separate butter containers because all the crumbs that end up on the margarine. You can buy toaster bags as well if you don't have 2 toasters. Those sort of little tricks and things is how we help the restaurants with making sure that they can cater gluten-free. So when people are diagnosed, we do require a letter from the doctor, or confirmation of the diagnosis. And this opens it up to people like yourselves who, some of you benefit from being on a gluten-free diet health-wise, and as we mentioned before, people with thyroid might not be celiac disease, but they benefit from the gluten-free diet. They're entitled to, or membership is available to them. In the application form, they just need a confirmation from the doctor that they benefit for their health to be on a gluten-free diet, so they don't actually have to have medically diagnosed celiac disease. Once they join, they get a new membership kit which has a handbook which is all about setting up your kitchen gluten-free. explain to your family that you're eating gluten-free, what's involved, why you're doing it. We do find some people who really struggle, and the family members really struggle with this change, especially the ones that are asymptomatic. People have had no symptoms of, well, why are you doing that? And all of a sudden, oh, you're just following that fad. And then you go on to tell them, yes, and you should be tested too, because there's a 10% chance, and then you just see people go, no way, that's not happening. So the handbook explains those sorts of things. They get a little ingredient list booklet, and that ingredient list booklet has every ingredient listed in it, and whether it's gluten-free or not. So that, tied in with the label reading when they're out shopping, helps them to ascertain if a product is gluten-free or not. A recipe book, which has got lots of recipes in there, and some samples from some companies that support us and provide samples for people to try. We do a monthly e-newsletter, updating people with things that are going on, any research changes, anything like that. So that goes out the first week of every month. We have participating businesses that offer discounts. So, for example, we've got Weigh and Pay, which is up in Woodvale. They do bulk flours and things like that. They do a discount. The Cudale Tavern does a discount for our members with their meals. So does Fast Eddie's in Perth. So there's about 5 or 6. There's an online gluten-free shop that does it as well. So there's about 5 businesses. The discounted prices for members is through Coles. Part of your Coles came on board about 5 years ago. Part of your membership on your member card, you get 5% off. I think it's about 110 products. A lot of them now, you would have noticed Coles have now brought out their Simply Gluten-Free range, so a lot of that has come onto it. There are some others on there as well, and we sort of worked it out. Really, you'd only need to shop at Coles maybe 4 or 5 times in a year, and you would have got the cost back of your membership anyway. So, and then we also have member-only services on our website. Really good fact sheets in there. The really popular ones are the travel translations, because obviously when you're diagnosed with an eating or a disease that obviously affects the way you eat, travelling can be rather daunting. So these translation cards are fantastic. You can print them out and take them with you, and it's written in English. I've got celiac disease, cannot eat, blah, 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 and then it's written in the language of the country that you're going to. So as a family, we've travelled extensively through Asia. My children have never been sick. I got barley belly. They didn't. So yeah, we've done Malaysia, Thailand, Indonesia, America. We've never, ever, ever had a problem with feeding my children ever in those countries. So not brave enough to try Europe, but we'll get there. Actually, it costs too much money to try Europe. So yeah, those sort of member services. We also have a member recommended restaurant list. It's not endorsed because we don't endorse any restaurants or things like that. But when our members have been somewhere to eat and they've had a really good meal and it's been obvious that they've understood what they need and what they require, they let us know, and we update this list and we pop it up on the website, an updated one every 6 weeks or so. And then if someone's okay, Arnie Jones coming down from Geraldton, let's go out for dinner, let's have a look, and they can jump on and find somewhere that they know that another member has eaten and had a safe and enjoyable meal. So that's a handy sort of sharing the love and the networking that we can do. Yes, we do have the professional restaurant members, which are the ones that have taken out the professional membership. That's available at the front of the website. So you can just click on, when you go onto our website, it's right there to see for everybody. So, because they've taken out the membership. So we're comfortable that we've trained them. As I said, we don't endorse or anything, but because they've had that extra bit of training, they're allowed to have their details at the front of the website. So, okay, so someone's interested in joining, you can join through the website. There's a form you can download there. You can call the office and we can send a form out to you. You can come into the office. The office is located in Queen Street in Bentley, just opposite Bentley Plaza. Office hours are 9 till 3, Monday to Friday. There's always at least 2 of us in the office. There's myself, I work 4 days a week. Christine, our admin officer, works 4 days a week. And Amy, our office support, she works 3 days a week. So there's always 2 of us in the office there. And as I mentioned, you do need to have either the letter from the doctor advising you require the gluten-free diet, or you can you can download the form off the website, and it's got the form that you can take into the doctor to get him to fill it out for you. Okay, that just about sums me up. Does anybody have any other questions? Yes?
Your supermarket
Tour, yep.
Do you have to be a member?
Yes, yeah. The labour reading workshop and the supermarket tour are member services, and also the supermarket tour is available online. Sue Shepherd, who I mentioned before, she's actually done it through a store in New South Wales, Victoria, and that's available on the website, and it's actually broken down into about 7 different chapters, so you don't have to sit there for 45 minutes and watch her talk. You can break that down, and that's available through the members section as well, which is great for our members who live rural, because we don't do very many things like that in the rural areas, so that way they get educated as well. So yes.
Could I ask, I was interested that you have an office and it's manned by 2 people 4 days a week. Where do you get your funding from?
We do, yep, we do have health department funding, limited health department funding.
Is that ongoing thing?
At the moment it is. I must admit, obviously we can't sort of say too much for privacy, but at the moment we do still have funding. We are hoping that will continue. I don't know how long we've had that funding for. I've been working with Celiac WA, this is my 4th year, so I don't know how long we've had that funding for, but at the moment we do still have the funding. I mean, obviously the membership drives the support as well, so but yeah.
Is that throughout each state in Australia?
No, WA is the only state that has funding, so the other states are all membership based alone. They do have a lot more members than WA, obviously bigger population of people, so the other states do have yeah, but no. It'd be nice to say the funding's going to carry on forever, but that's in the lap of the government, really. So we do report to them. We do a lot of statistical work and administration work to support why we're a worthy cause to fund. So hopefully that will continue on. So.
Do you have counselling? Because there's a lot of families. I'm just thinking about my background. Italian. It's so hard to give up things like pasta. I have. I've done it successfully.
Yep.
It must be so hard.
Yeah, I mean, I must admit, one of the things that I would have to say has improved in the last 5 years is the quality of the gluten-free pasta. I mean, the biscuits and things you can take and leave and whatever, but pasta now, because that's one thing I do, when we have pasta at night, I buy the gluten-free. No, I don't think it does anymore. I find I did use up, and I had the 1 pot of gluten-free pasta and the 1 pot of gluten pasta and the 2 stirring things, and I used up what I had, and then I said to my husband, I don't care what it costs, I'm just going to have 1 lot of gluten-free pasta. And funnily enough, now if I go out to eat and I order pasta and obviously get normal pasta, to me it's it tastes funny that the gluten-free pasta actually tastes nicer. So, I mean, I don't like to recommend brands and things like that, but Barilla and San Remo, which are the 2 recent ones in the last couple of years, I mean, Barilla in particular, this is a personal thing. Obviously, I'm not spruiking them through the office, but yeah, no, their pasta is, my kids are just in love with it. So, yeah. With regards to counselling, we don't have counselling as such. We do have a dietitian, Michelle Sladden, and she is fantastic. Michelle was diagnosed with celiac disease herself over 20 years ago, so she's got some wonderful stories about having to drive 2 hours to get a frozen brick that they passed off as bread 20 years ago, and the costs and those sorts of things. So it is quite funny, and you sort of do hear people sort of make that comment, oh my God, and I know I do sort of hear her say every now and then, well, when I was diagnosed, and I think, yep, they need to sort of, and it is hard to accept, but yeah, obviously there's a heck of a lot more choice out there. I know she used to say to people when they first came in, well, look, it's not like you're ever going to get to eat Wheat Bix again, and then lo and behold, Sanitarium brought out gluten-free Wheat Bix, so she's had to change her tack a bit, but she is very, very good. I have heard her talking to people, and obviously being someone who's lived it as well herself, she's fantastic at sort of providing that support as well for people. But counselling as such, we don't actually have a physical counsellor on staff to assist with people. So
I've seen the show with my son.
yeah.
I won't do the 4 weeks test.
Yep. You couldn't do it. Yep. And as I said, yeah, we recommend it, but it's a personal choice. So.
The worst thing is really the fatigue for me.
Yes.
I could not do fatigue for 6 weeks anymore.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know if I missed it, but have you mentioned the cost of the membership?
Oh, sorry. Actually, don't have the cost like that. Membership, it's $50 per year for standard membership and $44 for pension and healthcare card. And then the inquiry or the membership pack, which I'll just flick back here, was the new membership kit. The handbook and the ingredient list and the recipe book and the samples. That new member kit is $40. So that's a one-off fee of $40 to get the book and the handbook and the ingredient list book, and then $50 or $44 per annum thereafter. So.
does give you a discount to get to the gluten-free expo.
And it gives you a discount to get to the gluten-free expo? Yes, it does. So I would personally like to make the gluten-free expo free to members, but we haven't quite got there yet. So, yeah, I think that would be wonderful too. Yeah.
Diagnosing it,
Yep.
you can only do that by endoscopy.
Well, it's a blood test to start with, and then the endoscopy, because what they're looking for is that damage to that small bowel, to the villi.
Many blood tests, and
Yeah.
I've got quite a few endoscopies because of reflux and gallbladder.
And they haven't picked it up, yeah.
Are you looking for that as well? Are you doing that?
I would imagine, as I said, not medically trained, but I guess it would depend on what they were looking for. So,
Basically what's causing the reflux.
I would expect if you had a half decent gastroenterologist who was doing an endoscopy, they would be taking samples from somewhere down there to check for it. But yeah, possibly. As I said, we always recommend. I mean, if you do think, oh, hang on, this could be an issue here, what might be going on, that it is always worthwhile heading back to the GP, armed with your little brochure, and go, look, can we just... So, and the thing is, then you can rule it out as well. Especially, I mean, even people who they test negative to the blood test and then they've still got that feeling of symptoms or whatever else, and they do the gene test and the gene test has come back and they give it as like, okay, well, it's not that, what on earth is it? So at least you can rule it out and go, okay, well, maybe it is just the intolerance thing. So it sort of answers that question.
Well, you don't have to have everyone of
No. And as I said, we have people who are asymptomatic, who have no symptoms whatsoever, and they're endoscoped and have lots of damage. And whether it's just because their body hasn't wanted to react, or, I mean, well, I'm not medically trained, so I don't know why, but, and that's why I think it's harder for them, because I think it'd be easier to cheat if you didn't have any symptoms. Although having said that, quite a few people, they do find once they are asymptomatic, they do develop symptoms, and see, my children were like that. They never had the classic symptoms, and now my children, within pretty much 35 to 40 minutes, they're head over a bucket, both of them. So, and they never had that symptom before. So that was about 6 months after diagnosis. So I know when they've had something, which is good when you've got a 15-year-old who pushes boundaries and, sure, you go and eat that Hungry Jacks and see how you feel. Oh.
Gluten that's in lies.
Yes.
They're the ones that can catch you out.
Yeah, I mean the wheat starch, yeah. I mean, and this is one of the things that we educate people with the label reading workshop, is it can be really tricky because there's three, glucose syrup from wheat, caramel from wheat and dextrose from wheat. Those three bifactors, yep, they're actually gluten-free because the extracting the glucose from the wheat goes through so many processes that the gluten actually gets eliminated. But the company has to put wheat on there because it's an allergen. So there are people who have wheat allergies. So obviously for someone with a wheat allergy, they can't have that. But for people with celiac disease, glucose syrup, caramel or dextrose from wheat is actually gluten-free. That's why malt whiskey, one gentleman when they first died, I guess I have to give up no, you don't have to give up your whiskey. I've got to give up beer. But yeah, malt whiskey and gin and vodka, all those spirits are all actually gluten-free because through the distillation process, I mean, malt's derived from, malt whiskey's from barley and the gluten is actually eliminated. So.
This gourd that I've had, they used to put me in hospital to stretch my gullet. Mm-hmm. And I went in there for day surgery and I ended up in intensive care for weeks.
Oh my goodness.
Because it tore all my gullet.
Oh no.
The endocrinologist now is a different one. Is hesitating to give me
to do anything, yeah. The damage that's in there, yeah. Because, yeah, I mean, obviously if your antibodies came back as positive, then that would be something that you'd have to discuss with the specialist as to whether they go down that road to confirm that. Because that is, I mean, that is the gold standard of diagnosis, is that damage. So, and then you know that it's definitely celiac disease and not an intolerance. So. Yeah, it's a hard one, that one. Yeah.
Thank you very much for coming in.
Oh, my pleasure.
Talking to us on a very important subject.
Thank you.